Sarah Jenkins, a kind-hearted waitress at Molly's Diner, hides her past struggles from a devastating fire. One rainy evening, she serves a mysterious limping man, Lawrence Wilson, a full meal despite his inability to pay, sparking conflict with her harsh boss, Tom. As Sarah faces workplace retaliation, Lawrence returns, revealing he's a former attorney who once saved Sarah's family. With Margaret Chambers, he exposes Tom's labor violations, rallying the community. Sarah's act of compassion unveils deep connections, but what will her future hold as the diner's fate hangs in the balance? Please support our channel to uncover more inspiring stories like Sarah's. Subscribe, share, and join us in celebrating quiet courage that changes lives. Your support ensures these hidden connections are remembered and shared. Thank you for being part of our community. Let's keep these stories alive together. The rain drummed a somber melody against the windows of Molly's Diner, a modest haven tucked on the fringes of Burlington, Vermont. The October evening was cloaked in gloom, the kind that seemed to seep into the bones. Inside, the diner hummed softly with the clatter of dishes and the low murmur of a dwindling crowd. Sarah Jenkins, a 32-year-old waitress, wove through the tables with a quiet efficiency, her chestnut hair pulled into a neat ponytail. Her hazel eyes, though warmed by a practiced smile, held a depth that spoke of battles fought in silence. A silver pendant, her father's military dog tag, hung around her neck, catching the dim light as she moved. Each dawn, she'd touch it and whisper, "Still standing, Dad," a ritual that tethered her to a resilience forged in loss. 5 years earlier, at 27, Sarah's world had burned to the ground. A fire had stolen her home, her memories, and the fragile scaffolding of her life. Left with nothing but grief, she'd rebuilt herself piece by piece, her scars hidden beneath the surface. She never spoke of it, not to the co-workers who saw her as a constant in the diner's rhythm, nor to the customers who left tips and fleeting thanks. Her pain was a private weight, carried as she served plates of comfort food and refilled coffee mugs. But on this rainy Tuesday, something stirred within her. At 8:47 p.m., the bell above the door chimed, piercing the diner's quiet. Sarah looked up to see a man in his mid-60s limping inside. His clothes, though tidy, were worn thin, and rain had soaked his jacket, leaving dark stains across his shoulders. He clutched a battered leather briefcase, holding it like a lifeline, and his face was etched with exhaustion, his eyes shadowed by a hunger that wasn't just physical. "Just a coffee, please," he said softly, his voice trembling as he glanced at the menu's prices. His hands shook, not from age but from need, and Sarah's heart ached with recognition. Without hesitation, she brought him more than he'd requested, a steaming plate of meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans paired with his coffee. "Kitchen mistake," she said, her smile gentle, the lie effortless. "It'll go to waste otherwise." The man's eyes widened, then glistened with gratitude, his weathered face softening. But before he could speak, a harsh voice shattered the moment. "What do you think you're doing?" Tom Blackwell, the diner's owner, strode over, his face red with anger. "We don't give handouts, Sarah. That comes out of your paycheck." His words were a public rebuke, sharp and deliberate, and Sarah felt them like a blow. The man shrank back, muttering an apology as he nudged the plate away. "I didn't mean," he started, but Sarah stopped him. "No, keep it," she said, her voice steady despite the knot in her chest. "I can afford it." She met Tom's glare, her heart racing with defiance and dread. Tom's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched. "You pull this again, and you're fired," he snapped. "This is a business, not a charity." The few customers left in the diner looked away, their silence louder than Tom's outburst. Sarah stood her ground, her chin raised, swallowing the humiliation like bitter medicine. "Eat," she whispered to the man after Tom stormed off, her voice soft but urgent. "Please." The man ate slowly, his hands still unsteady, and Sarah felt a fleeting warmth amidst the sting of Tom's words. But the repercussions came quickly. By morning, her act of kindness had become fodder for gossip among the staff. Tom, eager to assert control, cut her hours and banished her to the diner's least profitable section, where tips were rare. Carl, Tom's nephew and a server who saw the job as a nuisance, didn't hesitate to twist the knife. "Better watch out, giving freebies to bums," he sneered during the morning prep. You'll have every homeless person in town lining up." His words cut deep, and Sarah felt her resolve waver. Maggie, the young hostess who usually shared warm laughs with Sarah, now avoided her, her eyes darting away in fear of being tainted by association. The kitchen staff, once kind enough to slip Sarah extra food, now doled out her employee meal with cold precision. During her break, Sarah sat alone in the staff room, her phone screen glowing with calculations of how the reduced hours would strain her budget. 5 years after the fire, she'd scraped together enough for a security deposit on a small apartment, a tentative step toward stability. Now that hope flickered, fragile as a candle in the wind. Her fingers brushed the dog tag, and she closed her eyes, fighting the urge to break. The limping man didn't return that day, and his absence lingered like a shadow. Sarah wondered if he'd found another meal, if he had a warm place to rest. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sharp crash of a glass slipping from her hands during a quiet afternoon. The shards scattered, and Tom pounced. "That's coming out of your check too," he declared, his voice ringing through the diner. "Maybe think about that before you give away my inventory next time." Sarah's face burned as she knelt to clean the mess, her pride aching more than her knees. No one moved to help, their silence a stark reminder of her isolation. That night, as Sarah locked up alone, a bother of Tom's punishments, she paused by the booth where the limping man had sat. On the table was a business card, left behind in the previous evening's turmoil. "Lawrence Wilson, attorney at law," it read, with an address in downtown Burlington. She tucked it into her pocket, a small keepsake of a moment of kindness in a day steeped in bitterness. As she walked to the bus stop in the dark, the weight of exhaustion pressed against her, heavier than ever. For the first time in 5 years, she wondered if the fight to rise from the ashes was one she could still endure. Sarah stepped into the crisp morning air, her breath visible in the early light as she approached Molly's diner, the familiar hum of routine anchoring her. But today, something felt off. Parked among the usual dusty pickup trucks and modest family sedans was a sleek black sedan, its polished surface gleaming like a stranger in a small town. It didn't belong here, not in Burlington, where life moved slowly and predictability was a comfort. Her heart gave a small, uneasy lurch, though she couldn't pinpoint why. She adjusted her apron, the dog tag pendant around her neck brushing against her collarbone, a quiet reminder of her father and a past she carried close. Inside, the diner's warmth enveloped her, the scent of coffee and bacon grease as familiar as her own heartbeat. But the air felt charged, heavier than usual. At the counter sat the limping man from 2 nights ago, his weathered hands cradling a steaming mug. His presence stirred a flicker of recognition in Sarah, though it was tinged with something deeper, an instinct she couldn't name. Beside him sat a woman in her 50s, her tailored suit and poised demeanor radiating authority, as if she'd stepped out of a courtroom and into the humble world of Molly's diner. Their conversation stopped abruptly as Sarah entered, the silence sharp and deliberate. The limping man rose, his movements slow but purposeful, his cane tapping softly against the floor. "Miss Jenkins," he said, extending a hand, his voice warm but carrying a weight that demanded attention. "Lawrence Wilson, I don't believe I properly thanked you for your kindness the other night." His eyes, sharp despite the lines etched into his face, held a quiet intensity, as if he saw more in her than she realized. Before Sarah could respond, the kitchen door swung open with a bang. Tom Blackwell, the diner's owner, stormed out, his face already flushed with irritation. "You can't come in here harassing my employees," he snapped, his voice cutting through the diner's hum. Sarah's stomach tightened. Tom's temper was no secret, but this felt different, more personal, more volatile. She braced herself, her fingers grazing the dog tag for comfort. The woman in the suit turned on her stool, her movements deliberate, her gaze unflinching. "Tom Blackwell," she said, her voice calm but laced with steel. "I'm Margaret Chambers, State Bar Association Ethics Committee, and I believe the only harassment here is what you've inflicted on Miss Jenkins and your other employees." The words landed like a gavel, silencing the diner. Every head turned, the clatter of dishes and murmured conversations replaced by a tense stillness. Lawrence Wilson opened his briefcase with a soft click, pulling out a folder that seemed to carry the weight of years. 15 years ago, he began, his voice steady but loud enough to carry to every corner of the room. I was a senior partner fighting for veterans' rights. A car accident took that from me. My practice, my reputation, my home. He paused, his eyes meeting Sarah's, a flicker of shared understanding passing between them. It left me with this limp, but it didn't erase my past. I was here in Burlington during the wildfire of 18, part of the disaster relief team. We evacuated 17 families, including a young woman and her father, Sarah and James Jenkins. Sarah's breath caught, her hand instinctively clutching the dog tag. It was her father's, a relic of his service, a piece of him she'd carried since his death. Her mind raced, fragments of that chaotic time resurfacing, smoke in the air, the roar of flames, the strangers who'd pulled her and her father to safety. Lawrence slid a weathered photograph across the counter. In it, a younger version of himself stood in a relief worker's uniform, beside a man in military fatigues and a teenage girl with wide, frightened eyes. Sarah recognized herself instantly, the memory hitting her like a wave. Her throat tightened, a mix of gratitude and disbelief swelling in her chest. I've spent years tracking down the families we helped, Lawrence continued, his voice softening but resolute. When I walked in here 2 nights ago and saw your name tag, then witnessed your kindness, your patience, even when you're clearly carrying your own burdens, I knew I'd found another piece of my past. His words stirred something in Sarah, a quiet pride she hadn't felt in years, but also a vulnerability, as if her struggles had been laid bare. Margaret Chambers opened her own folder, her expression unyielding. What I didn't expect to find, she said, her tone cutting through the room, was a pattern of labor violations, Mr. Blackwell. Unpaid overtime, illegal deductions from paychecks, harassment. Tom's face drained of color, his bravado crumbling under the weight of her words. You can't prove, he started, but a voice interrupted from behind. I can. Carl, a regular who often lingered at the counter, stood holding his smartphone, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a quiet resolve. I recorded everything yesterday, your threats about docking Sarah's pay for the broken glass, the fudged time cards. It's all here. The diner seemed to hold its breath, every eye on Tom, who froze, his anger giving way to panic. Lawrence placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder, his touch steadying her racing heart. I wasn't just any lawyer, Miss Jenkins, he said, his voice low but firm. I specialized in labor law before my accident, and it seems I've just found my way back to it. Sarah stood speechless, the dog tag warm against her skin, anchoring her as the past and present collided in a way she'd never imagined. She felt a surge of hope, fragile but real, that maybe the weight she'd carried for so long, working grueling shifts, enduring Tom's unfairness, might finally shift. By noon, Molly's diner had transformed into something unrecognizable. Word of the morning's events spread like wildfire through Burlington, turning the diner into an impromptu hub of community and justice. Locals crowded in, some out of curiosity, others drawn by a sense of solidarity. Reporters squeezed into booths, their notepads scribbling furiously as the story unfolded. The waitress who'd shown kindness to a stranger, revealed to be Lawrence Wilson, once the state's fiercest advocate for workers' and veterans' rights. Regulars returned from their morning routines, their faces a mix of shock and admiration. 3 more attorneys arrived, former colleagues of Lawrence, their eagerness palpable as they spoke of Sarah's case, a cause they were ready to champion. Tom remained barricaded in his office, the blinds drawn tight, his silhouette occasionally visible as he paced, shouting into his phone. His absence left a void that the community filled. Maggie, the young hostess, spoke up, her voice trembling but resolute. I've worked here 3 years, she told a table of attorneys, her hands twisting nervously. Sarah trained everyone. She covered shifts when my daughter was sick, when others needed time off. She never complained, not even when Tom cut her health care last year. Her words carried a quiet fury, a loyalty to Sarah that mirrored the diner's growing resolve. A burly truck driver, a Thursday regular, stood to pay his bill, but paused. Instead of leaving, he pulled a 20 from his wallet and dropped it into a jar he labeled Sarah's Fund, placing it by the register. For everything you've done, he said gruffly, avoiding Sarah's eyes. Within an hour, the jar overflowed, bills spilling onto the counter, forcing Maggie to find a second, then a third container. An elderly woman, her hands trembling as she added her contribution, caught Sarah's gaze. 5 years you've served me breakfast, she said, tears brimming. After my husband died, you were the only one who remembered how I like my tea. 2 sugars, no milk. You think we didn't notice you, Sarah? We noticed. The kitchen staff, emboldened by the day's momentum, began to speak. They revealed how Tom had shorted their paychecks for years, docking wages for minor infractions, threatening deportation for those who dared protest. Their voices, once silenced by fear, now carried a collective strength, fueled by the community rallying around Sarah. As the afternoon wore on, an unexpected figure appeared in the doorway. Michael Jenkins, Sarah's younger brother. His arrival sent a jolt through her, a mix of joy and apprehension. She hadn't seen him in months, their lives pulled apart by distance and the grind of survival. His eyes, so like their father's, held a quiet determination, as if he'd come not just to witness, but to stand beside her in whatever came next. In a bustling Vermont diner, the air thick with the aroma of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon, Sarah stood frozen for a moment as a familiar voice cut through the hum of the crowd. Sarah! Lawrence's call was a beacon, pulling her from the haze of her routine. Her heart skipped, a flicker of hope igniting in her chest as she turned. Her carefully guarded composure, a fragile mask worn through years of hardship, shattered the moment their eyes met. They rushed toward each other, arms entwining in an embrace that felt like homecoming after a long, lonely war. The diner erupted in applause, a wave of warmth from strangers and regulars alike, their claps echoing the unspoken recognition of a reunion heavy with meaning. Sarah's eyes brimmed with tears, not just from seeing Lawrence after his years abroad with the military, but from the weight of everything she'd carried alone. Lawrence's face, weathered by time and service, softened as he pulled back, his gaze searching hers with a mix of relief and concern. I tracked you down, he said, his voice low, almost breaking. Why didn't you tell me things were so bad? The fire, Dad's passing. You said you were fine. His words weren't accusatory, but steeped in a quiet ache, the kind that comes from loving someone too much to see them suffer in silence. Sarah's throat tightened, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her apron. I didn't want to burden you, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the clatter of plates. You were out there serving our country, carrying the weight of the world. I thought I could handle it. Her words hit a deeper truth, the pride that kept her from admitting how the fire had gutted her family's home, how her father's death had left a void no amount of hard work could fill, and how she'd poured herself into this diner to keep from drowning in grief. As the two stood, their reunion a quiet island in the sea of the diner's chaos, Margaret Chambers approached, her steps deliberate, her presence commanding. Lawrence limped slightly beside her, his injury a silent testament to his sacrifices. Margaret, a sharp-eyed advocate with a reputation for unyielding fairness, held a folder thick with documents. Miss Jenkins, she began, her tone professional yet warm, we've documented 47 separate labor law violations. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle before naming a settlement figure that made Sarah's knees buckle. The number was staggering, a lifeline she hadn't dared to imagine. But her first thought wasn't of herself. The diner, she protested, her voice trembling as she glanced around at the familiar faces, cooks flipping pancakes, waitstaff weaving through tables, regulars nursing their coffee. These people, they'll lose their hums. Her heart clenched at the thought of this place, her sanctuary, crumbling under the weight of her victory. Lawrence's eyes twinkled with a spark of hope as he interjected. I've made some calls, he said, his voice steady despite the limp in his step. The property owner is willing to transfer the lease. With your settlement, you could become the owner, if that's something you want. The idea hit Sarah like a gust of wind, both exhilarating and terrifying. She shook her head, her ponytail swaying with emotion. I'm just a waitress, she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them, laced with the self-doubt that had rooted itself deep within her. But the room disagreed. A chorus of voices, customers, co-workers, neighbors who trickled in throughout the day, rose in unison. You're much more than that. Their words wrapped around her like a warm blanket, each voice a reminder of the community that saw her not as a role, but as a person who'd held this place together with quiet strength. Later that afternoon, the diner's usual hum was pierced by a different kind of tension. Tom, the diner's owner, emerged from his office, his shoulders slumped, his face etched with defeat. Flanked by lawyers, he approached Sarah, who still wore her waitress uniform, a symbol of her tireless dedication. Margaret's voice cut through the air, clear and authoritative. The paperwork is signed. Effective immediately, Tom has agreed to sell his business interest to avoid criminal charges. Tom opened his mouth, his voice faltering. "I never thought," he began, but the words died in his throat, swallowed by the weight of his own choices. Sarah met his gaze, not with anger, but with a quiet resolve that spoke louder than any accusation. "I don't want revenge," she said softly, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions within her. "I just wanted to be treated fairly." Her words hung in the air, simple yet profound, a testament to the dignity she'd clung to through every late shift and unfair cut in her paycheck. Lawrence Stein, standing nearby, gave her a small, proud smile. "And now," he said, "you'll be treated as what you've always been, the heart of this place." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow through the diner's windows, Sarah found herself in what was now her office. The desk, once Tom's domain, felt foreign under her fingertips. On it sat a nameplate that read Manager, a relic of Tom's reign. With gentle hands, she pushed it aside, her movements deliberate, as if setting down a burden she'd never asked to carry. In its place, she set a handwritten sign, the ink still fresh, "Everyone welcome." The words were more than a greeting. They were a promise, a reflection of the community she'd built through countless small acts of kindness, refilling coffee cups with a smile, listening to a regular's troubles, slipping an extra pancake to a hungry kid. Her heart swelled with a mix of fear and possibility, the weight of ownership both daunting and exhilarating. The following Sunday, the diner was alive with its usual weekend crowd, but something had shifted. Laughter rang out more freely, the staff moved with a newfound purpose, and a community board near the entrance buzzed with notes of local needs and offerings, a neighbor seeking a babysitter, a farmer offering fresh eggs. Sarah sat at a table, her coffee steaming, when a small girl, no older than 6, approached. Her tiny hands clutched a carefully folded paper crane, its edges precise despite her young age. She placed it beside Sarah's cup, her voice a shy whisper. "My mommy says you're a hero." Before Sarah could respond, the girl scampered back to her family, leaving Sarah staring at the crane, her eyes misting over. The gesture, so small yet so profound, cracked open something inside her. A realization that her quiet perseverance had rippled outward, touching lives she hadn't even known she'd reached. In that small Vermont diner, now known across the state, Sarah's story was a quiet reminder of the power of resilience. Strength, she'd learned, wasn't in the loudest voice or the grandest gesture, but in the steady perseverance of those who carried on when no one was watching. Dignity wasn't measured by titles or wealth, but by how we treat others when we have little to give. Her journey, born from a simple act of fairness, had woven a tapestry of connection, revealing the deep ties that bind us beneath the surface of our daily struggles. Sarah's heart, once heavy with loss and unspoken pain, now beat with purpose, a quiet beacon for a community that had rallied to lift her up, just as she had always lifted them.